Sorry, bear with me. Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome all delegations for the first day of TBT week. As you have seen in the annotated draft agenda we circulated, we will start this week with a full day of CAPS sessions. We've denominated the CAPS Fest, trying to make it a thing. And we really look forward to a lot of interesting and rich conversations around all things CAPS. And as you would have seen, as you'd have seen, we're going to be dealing with different aspects of conformity assessment procedures. And it's very timely that we're doing that, as some of you might have remembered. We are celebrating 2 years of the adoption of the CAPS guidelines, which was a very significant milestone for our TBT community. So this CAPS Day does provide a good opportunity, a good platform for us to really benefit from all the expertise, all the CAPS expert here, either in the room or online, and exchange experiences and challenges, opportunities, everything surrounding this really important topic that sometimes get overshadowed by technical regulations and standards, but it's definitely there as part of the TBT tripod. So with that, just an overview on the sessions. Our first one will be on the role of national quality infrastructure in regulatory systems, moderated by Dana Lehman from the United States by my side. Thank you, Dana. Second session will focus on risk assessment and use of first-party conformity assessment, moderated by my friend Ana from Costa Rica. Third session, we'll be exploring market surveillance risk assessment methodologies, moderated by Esther Ngari from Kenya, who's here in Geneva. And fourth one, discussing mutual recognition agreements across different sectors, moderated by Roland Benston from the United Kingdom. Thank you, Roland. Just as a reminder, these were some of the topics we agreed in the context of the 10th Triennial Review concluded November 2024. So it's good that we continue following up with that, the important work on that review. Also to note that moderators have been organizing the sessions today in light of that same reports and the recommendations it contains for increasing engagement in thematic sessions. So we really tried this time to make sure it's as interactive as possible. Also bearing in mind the feedback we heard from members at January's informal this year. So we really thank all the moderators for putting in the time. I know it's quite a lot of effort, so thank you for your ability to come and to moderate these sessions. And obviously, thanks for the Secretariat for once again their amazing support. We're holding today's sessions in hybrid mode with the possibility to connect via Zoom as well, as we've done with similar sessions in the past. And you can access interpretation services as well in all the 3 languages. With that, I would also just briefly encourage members to engage as much as possible. We have a long day today, 4 sessions and UK hosted side events at 1:30. Also talking about CAPS, but on this occasion, focusing on the CAPS guidelines. We have a panel of people who were here during the negotiations, also some experts to talk about their impact, what those guidelines mean or represent. So we do welcome everyone who can to make to that event, and light lunch provided between 1 and 1:30 so that we survive the whole day. And I think that's it. So with that, I will hand over the floor to Dana for the first session. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you, Patrice. So good morning, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, both here in room W and joining us online. Welcome to the TBT Week thematic session on the role of the national quality infrastructure and regulatory systems. My name is Dana Lehman. I am the director at the NIST Standards Coordination Office in the United States, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's discussion. This thematic session will explore how robust national quality infrastructure acts as the backbone of effective regulatory systems. NQI is not just a technicality, but a critical strategic pillar for economic growth, public health, environmental safety, and regulatory compliance. A robust NQI ensures that conformity assessment procedures are trusted, efficient, and minimize technical barriers to trade. Today's session aims to foster a shared understanding of how stronger NQI improves regulatory outcomes, reduces trade costs, and promotes economic development. Before starting our discussion, I'd like to provide just a few remarks on how the session will run. We have 2 rounds of discussions. The first round, all of the speakers will be given the floor for about 6 minutes to make their main points. Speakers who wish to do so may display their slides on the screen to highlight key messages. When we move to the second round, in which the speakers will respond to my questions and or react to each other's comments, and then after that, we'll open the floor for questions and comments from participants in the room and online. Our aim is to conclude by 11:30 a.m. at the latest, because we'll need to move to the next thematic session of the day. So with that, I'd like to begin with opening and setting the scene for each speaker. So our first speaker is Mr. Daniel Mansfield from the British Standards Institution to share his reflections on how the main building blocks of national quality infrastructure, standards, metrology, testing, accreditation, and certification work together to enable international trade, and what the role standards and the standardization community play in keeping that system robust, coherent, and aligned internationally. So with that, Daniel.
Good morning, members and representatives, and thank you for that introduction. I'm delighted to be presenting here this morning. So I have a few perspectives from BSI as the UK's national standards body. And quality infrastructure is referred to as a system. And in different countries, different parts of the world, as we know, the various pillars are organized in different ways. So my presentation today is very much informed by our experiences as BSI. I mean, in practice, the parts of the system work together anyway. For example, accreditation is underpinned by standards, conformity assessment is undertaken against standards, and of course, measurement informs the content of those standards. But given that the theme of the day is around conformity assessment, for that to work well, all of the parts must function together. So just about BSI, we are independent from the UK government, but we are recognised by the government as the UK's national standards body. So in terms of the governance of the organisation I represent, we're what's called a Royal Charter organisation in the UK. That just means we own ourselves. When we have to reinvest any surplus in what we do. We have a memorandum of understanding with the government, which is renewed from time to time. The last one was renewed in 2024. And we also sort of operate by a very strict internal code of conduct. The point about standards for me is their legitimacy, the fact that all relevant stakeholder interests, we seek to involve all relevant voices when developing them, and work through a process of stakeholder consultation, which is where the reputation of standards sits. And therefore, why the government is interested, or why governments are interested, there is therefore the potential for standards to deliver or support policy. And we always say when developed in accordance with the rules that we operate at through at BSI, but we of course in BSI, we're part of the global standard system, also encompassing ISO and IEC. There is, in the UK, we do have a small amount of funding for specific purposes, but largely our role is to sort of operate independently of that government interest. Sorry, independently of government, direct government influence. And BSI, given that we're an independent organisation, we've seen great value in deliberately coordinating with other national quality infrastructure bodies, in particular the work we have done with the National Physical Laboratory, the UK's National Measurement Institute, and UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. So as the three big national organisations representing three of the pillars of conformity assessment, three of the pillars of quality infrastructure. Of course, conformity assessment and market surveillance happen in a much more distributed way. There isn't really the same set of national bodies for that. So, but we have found it to be very profitable to, or very useful to align in our messaging, as we each have national and international convening roles. We're fortunate that our principal UK government departments are also developing their own views and policies around quality infrastructure and have been keen to work together with us to maximise possibilities for alignment. And we are also supporting, through BSI, we're also supporting coordination of quality infrastructure efforts at the European regional level. So my Director General of Standards is currently chairing a new European group called the European Quality Infrastructure Network. So we have developed materials both as BSI and working collectively with other QI bodies as ways of articulating the benefits of quality infrastructure. And one of the things that we really tried to do when working with the UK government is matching government in the language that it uses and the spectrum of choices that it has in terms of policy setting, and to provide examples of where things have worked in the past with QI and systems. Obviously, I focus mostly on standards, but where that has helped to drive better or more effective regulation and better outcomes. So here, our focus is usually on domestic regulation. But in the worlds of standards, measurement and accreditation, we're rarely facing issues as the UK alone. And so our collective international experience and influence in standards is really important. Together with at BSI, we have a policy of international first in terms of the standards programs that we work on. So we will work where possible to seek international consensus when developing standards and adopt those international standards into our national catalogue. So just on the screen, that slide there, that's a picture, an image of a slide where I've developed a standard-centered view that tries to put how standards work and how standards and quality infrastructure function together to support government policy aims. The spectrum slide where we talk about things like self-regulation and prescriptive regulation and things in between, so we try to present a range of options. And then on the right-hand side, we've also developed, and we're working actively with, so between BSI, UCAS and NPL, we've developed what we're calling the UK Quality Infrastructure Hub. It's a website, it's a web resource that we've encouraged our national government officials to sign up to and join, and that we are sort of developing to help them discuss things. At the minute, that does only have a UK face. We don't know that it may be possible to open that up internationally in the future. We've also seen great interest in quality infrastructure and working with the UK government on capacity building and technical assistance programs around the world, where we've shared our perspectives on coordination between quality infrastructure partners and the use of international standards. And so this has featured in recent projects in the ASEAN region, in Kenya and in Nigeria. So in a trade context, the powerful thing about quality infrastructure, as I see it, is how it underpins trade through helping to provide certainty on all sides. We've seen a marked increase in the stock of international standards since the late 90s and early 2000s, a time which also saw the creation of the World Trade Organization and the conclusion of the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement. So it's difficult to point to hard evidence. We might conclude that at least Some countries have called up international standards as a basis for their technical regulations, in part to meet the requirements of Article 2.4 of the TBT agreement. And if we just focus on international standards, although government, not BSI, sets policy, I think for us, we see their power as reaching beyond borders and a way of linking goods regulations to standards for product safety or performance or other characteristics is a great way to help to drive trade in those goods. And so therefore, quality infrastructure based on international shared international standards is critical to underpin multilateral trade based on the WTO principles and, of course, now the CAP guidelines, irrespective of whether countries have entered into any other preferential trading arrangements. So that's where I finish now. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move to our next speaker. Let me now turn to Mr. Mohammed Ashir from the Standards Council of Canada. From a Canadian perspective, what are membership's experiences in establishing or strengthening NQI systems and enhanced regulatory effectiveness and facilitation of trade?
Thank you, Dana, for the question, and good morning, members. So in Canada, we have learned that strengthening a national quality infrastructure is not only about building technical capacity. It's also about governance, structured coordination, international alignment, and having sustained engagement across the entire system, including with regulators, standards development organizations, conformity assessment bodies, industry, and trading partners. At the center of this system is the Standards Council of Canada. It's important to note that SCC does not develop standards itself. Rather, as the custodian of Canada's standardization system, we work closely with the regulators, and we credit organizations that develop standards as well as organizations that carry out independent third-party assessments. In that role, SCC serves as both Canada's national standards body and its accreditation body, offering the broadest scope of accreditation programs in the country. And this integrated mandate allows us to strengthen the full quality ecosystem, from how standards are developed to how conformity assessment bodies are accredited to ultimately how inspection, certification, and testing results are trusted both internationally and nationally. Now, the million-dollar question is, or the million Swiss question is, how do we actually do this in practice? And the answer is multifaceted. First, by having structured coordination with the regulators. SEC works directly with regulatory departments across sectors to ensure the effective use of international standards in technical regulations and third-party conformity assessment, as well as national standards of Canada within regulatory frameworks where appropriate. We do not design or implement regulations. Instead, we work closely with regulators to help ensure that technical regulations make use of international standards consistent with Canada's obligation under the WTO's TBT agreement. On the domestic side, standards development organizations that are accredited by SCC are the ones responsible to develop national standards of Canada. As a condition of their accreditation, these organizations must demonstrate conformity to the requirements set out in Annex 3 of the WTO's TBT agreement, which is the code of good practice for the preparation, adoption, and application of standards. So in practical terms, this means when regulators rely on national standards of Canada, they can be confident that internationally recognized best principles are embedded in the standards development process, including those of Annex 3, as well as the best practices from ISO and IEC guidance. Secondly, we support regulatory accuracy and currency through a tool called Monitoring Standards and Regulations. MSR allows SEC to track the international standards and national standards that are incorporated by reference in regulations. For those who do not know, incorporation by reference is a regulatory technique that allows a voluntary standard to be referenced in regulation, giving it a mandatory effect without having the need to reproduce the full text. Through MSR, we can identify standards that have been revised or withdrawn and provide regulators with reports on their current standard. This enables regulators to verify that those reference standards remain valid and up to date, reducing uncertainty for regulated entities, lowering compliance burdens, and supporting clearer and more modern regulatory frameworks. Importantly, MSR also supports the objectives of the CAP guidelines by providing regulators with clear visibility into standards that underpin technical regulations and conformity assessment procedures, helping ensure that those conformity assessment decisions are based on current and technically valid standards. Building on this, let me also share a few concrete examples of how SEC, as an NQI institution, helps translate regulatory and policy priorities into trusted conformity assessment frameworks. In practice, this means identifying a regulatory need, facilitating the development of a standard or accreditation program, and accrediting conformity assessment bodies so both industry and regulators can rely on independently verified results. One of the examples is of that electronic logging devices accreditation program. These devices automatically record driving time in commercial vehicles, supporting enforcement of hours of service rules and contributing to road safety in Canada. Transport Canada, who is the regulator in this space, mandated that these devices be tested and certified by accredited bodies, by third-party conformity assessment bodies that are accredited to ISO and IEC 17025 standard under an SEC accredited scheme. SEC worked closely with Transport Canada to establish this program, helping ensure that these certification bodies are capable of demonstrating competence, are competent basically to assess compliance consistently and reliably. Another example is that of Cybersecure Canada program. This SEC accreditation program strengthens the baseline cybersecurity among micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Under this program, SEC accredits organizations and certification bodies to ISO IEC 17021-1, creating a trusted pathway for organizations to demonstrate credible cybersecurity practices and supporting broader policy objectives related to digital trust. So, taken together, Canada's experience shows that a quality infrastructure is built on good governance, credible accreditation, international alignment, including participation in multilateral accreditation arrangements that enable global recognition of conformity assessment results. So when these systems are aligned and confidence is built in the accredited conformity assessment bodies, both domestically and internationally, regulatory effectiveness is achieved and trade is facilitated. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashir. So next, I would like to turn to Mr. Andreas Steinhorst from the European Cooperation for Accreditation. And for Andreas, what is the role of accreditation bodies in strengthening national quality infrastructure and building trust in testing, inspection, and certification results, both for regulators and for trade? And could you share one or two European examples of how accreditation supports confidence and reduces duplicative conformity assessment? So thank you, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you, Dana. And first, good morning to the WTO. I hope you can see my screen. So I apologize that I was not able to be in person present, but I tried to give you an overview about the role of accreditation in regard to the quality infrastructure. Here, that was already mentioned, accreditation conformity assessment, that are essential pillars of the quality infrastructure, and they are very important to facilitate trade. Just as a first information and also following what the colleagues have already been said from BSI and SCC, that's not about the national quality infrastructure, more about the European quality infrastructure we have established some years ago. And you can see here that this network is comprised of the essential pillars of the quality infrastructure, that is for standardization, CENELEC, for metrology, Euramet, and WellMec. But we have also the conformity assessment pillar with Eurolab, and finally also market surveillance represented by ProSafe. And of course, also EA as the European Association of National Accreditation Bodies. A quality infrastructure is essential. That is what was already mentioned. But you need a robust structure for it. And this structure must be established if we are talking about a national quality infrastructure in the nation, in the country itself. So it's important that you build up this system and that you do not rely only about services provided by perhaps organizations located in other countries. And that is especially important if we are talking about accreditation and conformity assessment. In order to get acceptance by regulators, but also by industry and consumers, it is important that you have a governance structure which is based on a close cooperation with the national authorities. And for that, it's, I think, useful if that is set out in some kind of legal framework. That is what we did in Europe, but that is not only the case in Europe. There are several other countries globally which have established the same system in order to get recognized by regulators. So what is essential if we are talking about the role of accreditation? Here, it's important really to highlight accreditation is the last level in the conformity assessment chain. So that is finally the final control that conformity assessment is operated in a appropriate and a proper way. It would be good if that is a situation we have in Europe. Accreditation is a service of public interest. That means also that the national accreditation bodies acting as public authority, that demonstrates the role, the value of accreditation. In Europe, there's based on EU legislation, there's set out that each member state shall have one single national accreditation body only. We know that there are some countries which have more than one accreditation body. What is more important is that the accreditation bodies are appointed, are recognized by their national government. So that is essential, especially if we are talking about the mutual recognition of conformity assessment results. So that is crucial. And then, of course, also that is in line with the role of accreditation as the last level in the conformity assessment chain, that we do not have competition among national accreditation bodies. Otherwise, you would need someone who is monitoring those activities, but that would not be the right role of accreditation, at least for regulatory purposes. Based on this structure, and that is when we are talking about how can accreditation facilitate trade, that is then really important. And that is the situation in Europe. National authorities shall recognize the equivalence of the services delivered by national accreditation bodies successfully undergone peer evaluation by EA, and thereby accept the accreditation certificates of those bodies and the attestations issued by the conformity assessment bodies accredited by them. That means there's an obligation for the national authorities to recognize test results and certificates. So there's that is not just an agreement. It's they shall recognize those conformity assessment results. And due to this structure, we have currently in Europe more than 150 EU legislations where we have accreditation and conformity assessment, including, and that is really important, with this mutual recognition of the conformity assessment results. Some of them are well known, that are the legislations in regard to union harmonization legislations, where we have the so-called notified bodies and CE marks involved, that is for machinery, lifts, toys, and many other industrial products. But we have also in the food and feed area, if it comes to organic production, for instance, accreditation and conformity assessment. EU ETS, the environmental trading system, the emissions trading system, but also now the EU CBAM in railway, in data protection, in many other sectors. We have now the legal structure with accreditation and conformity assessment. And that guarantees that we have the free move of goods in the single market. I mentioned here already a couple of products. We are also entering in new systems. They are not really new anymore, but nevertheless, there are some challenging new sectors. And that is, for instance, cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And here we have also, accordingly, legislative framework. We have here, for instance, the Cybersecurity Act and the Cyber Resilience Act, where accreditation and conformity assessment plays a significant role. That means that products with digital elements, they shall be in compliance with the Cyber Resilience Act, and those products shall be tested and certified by conformity assessment bodies which have demonstrated its competence via accreditation. And the same is, for instance, for the artificial intelligence. So here we have already several accredited conformity assessment bodies recognized for those sectors, especially here for the Cybersecurity Act, and where we could really demonstrate that accreditation is a proper means to demonstrate the competence of the conformity assessment bodies. Another example where accreditation and conformity assessment are important, that is, of course, if it comes to trade agreements. And here, just one example, that is the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement between the EU and Canada. And part, of course, of this trade agreement is a specific chapter on technical barriers to trade. And here you can find a reference to the CETA protocol on the mutual acceptance of the results of conformity assessment. And here what is essential, that even if there are differences in technical requirements, but if the products covered under the trade agreements are tested by an accredited, by a recognized conformity assessment body, accredited by a national accreditation body, either from SCC in Canada or from the national accreditation bodies in the EU, then those conformity assessment results shall be accepted and the products can be placed on the market either in Canada or in the EU. And that was already emphasized by the previous speakers. If we are talking about the recognition of conformity assessment results, then the cooperation between the quality infrastructure, and here's an example, accreditation, with the regulator is key. And here you can see that EA is cooperating with many different departments of the European Commission in order to facilitate the implementation of the EU legislations and to facilitate the mutual recognition of the conformity assessment results. I will not go into detail. It's just shall demonstrate how important this close relationship between the quality infrastructure pillars and the regulators is. So, and therefore, many countries, they have established the same structure on the national level, and that will facilitate the recognition of accreditation and conformity assessment. My last slide, that is not about the national quality infrastructure or the EU system or how it works in other countries, is more an information. I have been asked to inform that perhaps you know that on the international level, there are the organizations IF and ILAC, and they are now not anymore operational. They have been replaced by a new global organization called Global Accreditation Cooperation Incorporated. And this cooperation became fully operational beginning of January this year. And ILAC and IF are in the process of winding down. The existing MLA or MRA, that means we have here to clarify that's an agreement among the members of these organizations, became effective on the 1st of January, and several of the, or most of the members of the previous members of IF and ILAC joined this new organization. With this information, I will close my presentation, and thanks for your attention. Greetings to the WTO.
Thank you, Andreas. So I would like to now turn to some of the challenges faced by economies in enhancing their national quality infrastructure. For this, let us turn to Mr. Amin Natali from the Botswana Bureau of Standards. What are the main challenges faced by developing economies in strengthening their NQI systems, and what types of support have proven most effective? It would be useful if you could illustrate this with a few examples from Botswana's experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana, for inviting me, and good morning, everyone. I did share the latest, presentation. I don't know whether you were able to see that. Otherwise, I might have to choose to project from this end. It looks like you are still projecting the old one. Can I just confirm that's the second one that I shared with you?
Do we have the recent presentation?
There were only 2 emails that I shared this morning.
Perhaps we can let Amin
it's only 4 slides. If it's the correct one, it will be 4 slides.
Is it possible to just use? Okay, just 1 minute.
Yes, I can share if you don't mind. That actually looks like the correct presentation. I think we can proceed.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you once again, Dana, for inviting me, and good morning, everyone. The many challenges that developing countries face include the following. We have the limited financing or high costs when establishing national quality infrastructure. Institutions such as laboratories, inspection bodies, accreditation bodies, certification bodies is capacity intensive, or it's a capital intensive. The inadequate domestic laboratories capacity requires manufacturers to send samples abroad. This increases cost and lengthen turnaround times. We have limited physical space that makes it difficult to invest in, maintain, and upgrade equipment. We also, as a developing countries, do experience a lack of qualified human capacity. There is a shortage of qualified and specialized areas like standards and conformity, effective implementation of international standards. Developing countries also is very clear that they experience fragmented legal and institutional frameworks. In many cases, the roles and responsibilities are not clearly defined, resulting in overlapping jurisdictions, conflicts of interest. For example, the same body, regulating and certifying, which is subject to confliction, and the lack of independence from political interference. Developing countries also experience weak private sector participation. The local industries may not see the value in or cannot afford voluntary certification, leading to the low demand for the quality services. Private sector actors often view the national quality infrastructure as a regulatory burden rather than as a competitive advantage. And in terms of the approaches to strengthen the quality infrastructure in developing countries, it is important that these countries move away from short-term ad hoc projects towards sustained strategic partnerships. One of the ways in which such countries can improve this challenges that they can establish a national quality policy. Botswana, as an example, established the national quality policy in 2002. And the main objective of this policy was to ensure that the quality of Botswana goods and services is designed to match the needs, expectations, and the requirements of producers, retailers, and consumers, and those of the regulatory authorities. Developing a coherent national strategy that brings together stakeholders such as the government, industry, and academia to define priorities is very, very critical. And since then, the country established a committee which is responsible for ensuring that there's a representation from the government, from the private sector, and from the academia, to these issues around the quality infrastructure. We also ensure that harmonization with the international standards to support that focus on aligning local regulations with the WTO TBT principles and international standards such as the ISO IEC is highly effective in easing export market access. Botswana, as an example, reviewed its import regulation in 2003 to align it with the WTO principles. We support for accreditation bodies is a very important strategic approach. Promoting the independence of accreditation bodies free from political influence and conflict of interest to ensure international recognition. As an example, Botswana has accredited some of its, conformity assessment services, such as, testing, inspection services, certification, and metrology. It is also beneficial to have in place a public-private sector, partnership. And by involving the private sector in the management and the funding of national quality infrastructure services helps to ensure that the system meets market needs. This encourages the participation of the private sector in developing technical regulations and ensures that they are practical and not, overly restrictive. I will at this point, pause here and thank you for your, listenership.
Great. Thank you, Amin. So next, and continuing on this theme, I would like to invite Mr. Edwin Cristancho from Colombia's National Accreditation Body. And then from that perspective of international acceptance of conformity assessment results, what are the main obstacles exporters in developing economies face when trying to assess foreign markets? And could you illustrate this with an example from Colombia, perhaps in agriculture?
Dana, thank you very much for your sharing, and also happy to be here with you. Yes, in fact, I'm gonna share a couple of slides regarding the relationship between the quality infrastructure and the regulatory infrastructure, and how those connect in a case that is the agricultural sector. First, I'm gonna explain how the connection between the regulatory infrastructure and the quality infrastructure is working. Basically, the quality infrastructure is based on minimal requirements, and they are connecting basically to answer issues regarding safety, health, environmental protection, and consumer protection. How they work is that they try to once they are issued, they are gonna be implemented, and the inspection, surveillance, and control organizations, if they find that there is a deviation from the regulatory requirements, they implement sanctions. The actors that are involved, of course, are those organizations that issue laws and regulations, the commissions, and of course, very important, the inspection, surveillance, and control institutions. The second element is the quality infrastructure. They are based on standards, as many of you have mentioned, metrology. And finally, the conformity assessment, that are those private or public organizations that help for the certification of products. And something very important is that the conformity assessment is common to be accredited because all the benefits that have been mentioned during the former presentations. The quality infrastructure is not of minimal. They are the response of voluntary market demands and how the international standards move along the market. In Colombia, many have mentioned how work in other countries. Now in Colombia, we have a national accreditation body. Next year, we are going to be 20 years old, and all these organizations in Colombia have been developed because of policy 20 years ago. Also, the National Metrology Organization, the standardization bodies and the conformity assessment bodies that are laboratories and all these certification organizations that are in the market. The ideal articulation between the quality infrastructure and the regulatory infrastructure is that the quality infrastructure is the base on the requirements, and on the top of these requirements are many other requirements. Should be of minimal and also should be less requirements than those of the quality infrastructure. The conformity assessment is the tool that connects the quality infrastructure and the regulatory infrastructure, and the mutual recognition agreements are those that reduce the technical barriers to trade, because the accreditations allows that the certifications that are produced in a country are accepted in other countries. They both, the regulatory and the quality infrastructure, provide the support for the government regulations, the international recognition, and of course the competitiveness of companies, because at the time that the companies cover the requirements of the standard and they are accredited, they can move along the market. Now let me show what are the situations that we are finding when we look in details cases in the agricultural sectors, and how there are frictions between the regulatory framework and the quality infrastructure. The first situation that we find is that in many cases, despite that the connection should be basic, is that the quality infrastructure accepts the regulatory infrastructure, they are not always operating in a coordinated ways. For example, sometimes the requirements are defined by the regulatory framework without technical validation or checking if there is feasible to be covered by conformity assessment, and that they are accepted at the international level. In certain ways, it's when the regulatory framework, the requirements of the regulatory framework are not covered by a standard. The second aspect happens when the regulations are issued without understanding how they will be verified. And of course, one of the facts that happen is that the uncertainty for companies take place. The third aspect in frictions is when regulations don't incorporate international standards, or they are covered partially. Let me mention one case, is that, as you many know, the Codex is the agreement between countries of the minimal requirements in safety, in food safety. So when the regulations in each country, in the case of Colombia, accept the Codex requirements, it should be the minimal for all the countries. Despite that, some countries, they don't accept the Codex, but they go up of the levels that the Codex are mentioned. It can happen. But of course, if the country of origin, in this case Colombia, follow the Codex, but other countries put requirements by law, by regulation that are up of the Codex regulations, the companies have to follow two different regulations, one for Colombia and another for the country of the market, of the final market. Finally, a final friction that we've identified is that the inspection, surveillance, and control entities not automatically accept certificates from conformity assessment bodies that are working on topics related on regulations based on a standard. What is the consequence for companies? First is the duplication of efforts and a higher cost to comply with the regulatory on the quality infrastructure, distrust about the value of accreditation and a conformity assessment, and difficulties for exporting. Basically, the inspection, surveillance, and control entities many times in Colombia, they provide results, and not always they are accepted at the international level. I'm gonna give you more details later, but finally, there are an overlap between regulatory and voluntary requirements, and they are not always complementary. Dana, thank you very much.
Thank you, Edwin. And for our final speaker, I would now like to invite Mr. Qian Gong from the Strategic Theory Research Center of China's National Institute of Metrology. And from the perspective that many regulatory systems worldwide are currently struggling with the compliance gap, where the pace of industry innovation outstrips the speed of regulatory enforcement. From your perspective, how does China's NQI system and service model transform where quality infrastructure becomes a proactive driver of its market stability?
Thank you, Dana. Can you hear me? Is that audio clear?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the introduction and good morning from China, distinguished delegates and colleagues. So Dana just posed a very pertinent question. So I would like to share China's one-stop shop quality infrastructure service practice in response, because we all know that regulatory resources are limited, but the markets continue expanding and technology accelerates. So the traditional regulatory approaches involve inspection and enforcement after problems emerge, resulting in high regulatory costs and heavy burdens for businesses, especially for SMEs. So the need for compliance and improved quality assurance capabilities is urgent, but on the other hand, the compliance requirements are complex. So they lack relevant technical capabilities and equipment, and in their daily operations, they must separately engage with, the QI elements, the metrology, standardization, etc. So creating high costs and significant challenges. So our approach in China is to front load the services by implementing this one-stop shop quality infrastructure services. So we provide a systematic technical guidance and support before enterprises' products enter the market, helping them proactively understand requirements and build quality capacity, thereby reducing non-compliance at the source. And since 2020, the State Administration for Market Regulation, SAMR, has been advancing this work continuously, issuing a series of policy documents. So to date, we have established 2,372 one-stop shop service stations across 31 provinces, integrating the core quality infrastructure elements. So this integrated service model has three main features. Firstly, it establishes a multi-tier collaborative network. The national level sets unified policy. Provincial levels concentrate technical capacity and allocate resources, and municipal and county level, they extend service reach to ensure the coverage. And secondly, it provides demand-driven customized services. So rather than the standardized packages, we flexibly combine quality infrastructure elements based on the actual enterprise's needs and industrial characteristics. And thirdly, it functions as a resource hub. So platforms don't just provide direct technical services. They also connect universities, research institutes, industry associations, and other parties to provide comprehensive support for enterprises, especially for the SMEs. And we already got many successful cases achieving good results. For example, Nanjing in Jiangsu province has established this quality mini stations across 15 high-tech parks, and key industrial chains, serving nearly 20,000 small and micro innovative enterprises. And Sichuan province built the online service platform enabling cross-department, cross-regional, and cross-industry quality technical services through a single online portal. So this work has actively improved regulatory approaches and enhanced regulatory effectiveness in two main ways. On one hand, it has increased enterprise compliance rates and reduced enforcement pressure. The enterprises receive systematic technical support before their product enters the market, gaining clearer understanding of the requirements and stronger quality control capabilities. So this allows regulatory departments to redirect the limited enforcement resources from routine inspections towards high-risk areas and critical issues. On the other hand, it has enabled resource sharing and improved overall efficiency. So the testing facilities built by the platforms and the technical expertise they've accumulated can be shared by the regulatory departments, avoiding the duplicative investment. So through the several years of practice, we have learned that the front-loading services can reduce non-compliance at the source, and resource integration can effectively lower overall costs. So we think QI should not merely serve as a tool for ex-post inspection. So it will become a critical technical foundation prioritizing prevention and supporting development. And this is my sharing for everyone. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Keenan. So now we'll turn to our second round of questions in which I will pose questions to each speaker. I invite the speakers to keep their interventions within 3 minutes. So we'll turn back to our first speaker, Mr. Mansfield. So how can the 2024 CAP guidelines support members' efforts in strengthening their NQI systems and facilitating trade?
Thank you. Well, as we've been hearing this morning, there are various models of quality infrastructure in use around the world. In the UK, we have a system of designated standards based on about 4,000 standards with a close link to regulation, and that's got a strong parallel with the European system of harmonized standards and conformity assessments, supported by the single national accreditation body model. But we know that isn't a common system, or that isn't common to everywhere in the world. And so I think the great strength of the CAP guidelines is that they are enabling and that they are non-prescriptive. So they what I see in them is how they lay the ground for mutual recognition agreements, and they provide a basis to give that confidence in conformity assessment and conformity assessment results that can then help to drive trade. I find it, it is useful that in the guidelines, whilst not being prescriptive, there are references to handy systems out there, such as the ISO Casco toolbox. And so I think, the great strength of them is that they lay the path for mutual recognition of conformity assessment results. And for me, they enable what for me would be the ideal, which is the use, that this should be based on the use of common international standards. And just a little plug for the UK session. I think at lunchtime we've got a side session where we're going to be talking about the CAP guidelines. So please pop along to that as well. But there we are. Thank you. I hope that was under 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Ashir, what are the most practical ways to reduce duplicative testing and certification across markets while maintaining trust, e.g., accreditation, peer evaluation, regulator-to-regulator cooperation, and MRAs?
Thank you for the question, Dana. All of these mechanisms are interconnected tools, and they reinforce each other. Together, they strengthen regulatory systems, support trade competitiveness, and promote the use of international standards and accreditation framework. So it's really difficult to point to a single solution, but at its core, Reducing duplication really comes down to one fundamental principle, and that is building trust in the conformity assessment results. If regulators trust the results that are issued in another market, there is no need to repeat the same testing or certification when a product crosses a border. So in Canada's experience, mutual recognition of accreditation and conformity assessment results is one of the most effective ways to achieve this. I'm going to use the same example that Andreas referred to in his presentation from the European accreditation. Under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement between Canada and the European Union, we have a conformity assessment protocol. This allows SEC-accredited testing and certification bodies to be recognized by EU authorities and vice versa for a defined list of products. And what this means is that accredited bodies in Canada can certify products to specified EU technical regulations, and those results are accepted in the EU market without requiring additional testing. I must also mention here that this protocol is built on a common baseline of accreditation expertise and ongoing demonstration of experience. Secondly, peer evaluation also plays a key role. As a signatory to the Global Accreditation Cooperation's multilateral arrangements, SEC undergoes regular peer evaluations by international experts, and these evaluations review our accreditation processes to ensure they meet international standards. This gives regulators, industry, and trading partners an additional layer of confidence that the Canadian accredited laboratories, testing, and certification bodies are competent and credible. Finally, ongoing collaboration and information sharing are essential. Reducing duplication is not only about having formal agreements, it also depends on continuous dialogue between regulators, accreditation bodies, and conformity assessment bodies. By maintaining open communication on standards, regulatory developments, and conformity assessment procedures, we can identify opportunities to streamline processes, prevent unnecessary duplication, and ensure those trusted results support regulatory compliance across borders. So in short, when accreditation is credible, when peer evaluation is rigorous, and when there are recognition arrangements in place, and there's ongoing collaboration with regulators, duplication can be significantly reduced without compromising trust. Thank you.
And next, with Andreas, since your presentation was very poignant to these topics, I'll ask you the same question. What are the most practical ways to reduce duplicative testing and certification across markets while maintaining trust?
Yeah, thank you. And I can be very brief because I can totally agree what my colleague from SCC already mentioned, that all elements are important to reduce additional testing and certification. Of course, accreditation is the best way to demonstrate the competence of conformity assessment bodies and to facilitate the mutual acceptance of conformity assessment results. And for that, we need also international standards to have the same ground, the same requirements. So all these elements are crucial for the whole structure. But I think what the quality infrastructure is doing, we are offering the structure, the infrastructure. So, but whether this infrastructure is being recognized, that is up to the regulators. So we can only offer a trustful structure. And but finally, we need MRAs between the countries. And here, of course, it would be useful, especially for trade, if they would take recourse to the utmost extent to the quality infrastructure and here to accreditation conformity assessment in particular.
Thank you, Andreas. Next, Amin, I think for you, how should a country's market surveillance capacity influence the design of conformity assessment, especially when resources are limited?
Thank you, Dana. Sorry for not being able to see the screen that you are sharing from that side earlier on. To answer your question, first of all, when designing, the technical regulations, the country has to ensure that it tries to, opt for the performance-based, technical regulations as opposed to, prescriptive, type. Um, the model that you see on the screen there is the model that has been adopted by Botswana through Botswana Bureau of Standards. So in countries with limited resources, a weak market surveillance capacity should shift the design of conformity assessment towards pre-market, control and third-party certification. Because of the state cannot effectively police products once they are on the shelf. It must ensure compliance before the goods enter the market. So this is what we do, and we ensure that the goods are subject to conformity assessment where they are manufactured and and approved through inspection agencies that we have engaged. And we ensure that once the goods is shipped, there's also the market control at the ports of entry, where we use the existing structure of customs, and to ensure that the goods are circulating. We ensure that we do a random market surveillance to confirm that indeed those goods are fit for purpose. Utilizing pre-shipment verification for import heavy economies like Botswana, products that are verified in the country of origin. We also imply the risk-based approach, where resources should be concentrated on high-risk products, for example, those that impact health, safety, or the environment. For the low risk, goods, simpler methods like, suppliers' declaration of conformity may be, adequate. There should also be, leverage regional cooperation. Resource constrained, countries can, share product testing and registration databases with their neighbors. This avoids, duplicating expensive infrastructure and facilitates, information sharing. Yes, information sharing. So if you look at what SADC region has adopted for the accreditation, instead of each member state coming up with the accreditation body, they have cooperated and come up with one single accreditation body where all regional members can benefit. We also have the digital registration system here in Botswana, where importers when they do their application for permits, they submit the request electronically, and hence eliminating paper and making the process efficient and turnaround times as short as possible. Thank you very much for the question. Back to you.
All right, thank you. And then I'm going to ask the last two speakers, Edwin and Keenan. I'm going to ask you both the same question because you both spoke about accreditation, that particular pillar of the NQI. So what are the most practical ways to reduce duplicative testing and certification across markets while maintaining trust? So we can start with Edwin.
Thank you, Dana. Yes, regarding what is happening, please take into account that Colombia is producing fruits and meat, and they are exporting everywhere. So the first recommendation is to recognize conformity assessment with international acceptance. as a strategy to reduce regulatory compliance cost. Just consider that when you produce fruits and meat, you expect that the essays and measures that you made in Colombia, they are accepted in the market of export. The second aspect is to make a quality infrastructure visible as a support for regulatory compliance, because it helps to reduce the cost to cover regulatory requirements. The third aspect is to promote the alignment of national regulations with the international ones. And finally, is that those those voluntary requirements should accept regulatory compliance as and specialize in more sophisticated market demands. It means that when the sanitary authorities sign protocols of acceptance, one exporter that is covered by the requirement of the national market, they are also accepted in the international markets. So basically what we find here, following also what said our Botswana representative, is that it's very important for countries that are exporters to work in a way that the requirements of the market are on the top of the requirements of the regulatory organizations. Thank you very much, Dana.
Yes, thanks, Edwin. Keenan, again, the same question for you about the practical ways of reduced duplicative testing and certification across markets.
Thank you, Dana, for the question. And I think the previous speakers have provided very inspiring insights on this issue. So building on their perspectives, I would like to share some thoughts from China's practical experience. And frankly speaking, I feel like reducing duplicative testing while maintaining trust is a common challenge we all face. So here from China, from the domestic practice, we are reducing the duplication from two levels. So the first level is resource sharing to avoid duplicative investment. So rather than having every locality build complete testing capacity, we share resources through our three-tier network that I mentioned earlier. So the provincial platforms they concentrate high-end testing equipment and specialized expertise, while municipal and county platforms primarily facilitate service connections. So this way, on one set of provincial facilities can serve enterprises across multiple regions. The second level is reducing redundant services within platforms. We have several pilot trials, and for example, Zhejiang has established a statistical monitoring system that collects the service data from platforms, including which enterprises were served and what services they were provided. So with this data, platforms can understand what services an enterprise has already received and provide subsequent services more strategically, avoiding the simple repetition. But I have to say, achieving the mutual recognition of these testing results between different platforms remain a problem we're still working on. And also this challenge, I feel like, becomes even more complex at the international level. So I think the key may lie into elements. The first one is, I think it's at the technical level. So we need information sharing mechanisms so parties know what testing has already been done. And secondly, at the institutional level, so we need to build a foundation of trust through approaches like accreditation systems and peer evaluation, etc., so that the parties have confidence in testing capabilities and result quality. And I believe it is necessary. So also, I would like to say that China's platform model is also still developing and improving. So I'm also very eager to learn from other countries about the good practices on this matter. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we have a few minutes left in our session to entertain questions from or comments from the floor. I would just ask that you keep those brief so that we can entertain as many voices as possible. And that is also participants online. You are also welcome to raise your hand to pose questions, and we can take a selection of those, time permitting. So with that, the floor is open. Do we have anything from online? Okay. So if we have nothing from the floor, I would ask if any of the speakers wanted to react to anything their colleagues had shared. No. Okay. Well, with that, I mean, we have about 5 minutes left in our program. So what I would do is thank all of our speakers for their interesting insights that they shared today, and to all of the information and discussion. I think for me, today's exchange has reinforced an important message, and I think we heard some themes. So collaboration across the pillars of NQI. And that collaboration can build trust, because if you do not have trust in the national quality infrastructure, you will continue to see the challenges exist. So you will see duplicative efforts, increased cost, it will build distrust, and then that will result in technical barriers to trade. So I think building that important structure and trust across the national quality infrastructure pillars is very important. So with that, I can close this session and wish you a continued successful day. I encourage you to participate in the other sessions today with regard across the conformity assessment space. And I think you will see that there is a link with each session as we build on and talk about this topic. So with that, I wish you all the best.
Greetings to the WTO.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you for the speakers for kickstarting us this day. To the floor, please don't be shy, think of questions. And I think we can move on swiftly to the next session. I'll hand over to Anna Lizano to kickstart session number 2 with that.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, dear friend. Oh, sorry.
We need about 2 or 3 minutes to get the speakers online to transition. So you're free to take 2 or 3 minutes. Sorry, Paul.